Welcome to the Be a Human in Business show with your hosts, Tracy Borreson, founder and personal branding coach at TLB Coaching and Events, Tara Argo, founder and relationship strategist at Argo Operations, Tawana Taylor, founder and project management consultant at Bootstrap Dreams, Debbie Aquara, founder and principal consultant at Niche Customer Experience Consulting Firm. Let's start the show.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Be a Human in Business show. Today we are so excited to be joined by our good friend, Kathryn Hodgens. And we have a fire topic for you guys today, but you know we can't start an episode without sending out our hearts to our Miss Debbie, who fingers crossed is going to be back for our next episode, which we're very excited about. I know, and then you guys will notice all those like creative titles come back.
I was about to say, come on, creative titles, we're coming back.
That's Debbie's specialty,
Yes,
amongst many other things.
amongst other things. Book her. Okay.
Yeah, anyway. So before we kick off this amazing episode called Truth, We're Human. Show up that way first. Let's do a little bit of our intro to our special guest. So Kathryn, can you tell everybody who you are and what you're all about?
Yes. Well, thank you for having me, first of all. And yeah, I am so happy to be here. I am a coach, and it's been such a pleasure to help people in all kinds of ways get in touch with themselves again. And that's what I'm really passionate about. I came from a corporate background, like all of these lovely ladies, and I think we share so much in common from that experience of living a certain way that wasn't quite aligned with who we are and not listening to ourselves until something shifted. And I hear myself now, and now I'm making a different choice with my life. And I work with women to do that, to figure out how to listen to that voice inside again and really come up with whatever answers they already need. It is a truth that I have witnessed so many times that everyone knows exactly what they need to do. It's just finding that connection with themselves again to hear it. It's in there. Sometimes it's under a lot of stuff, but it is always in there. And yeah, that's what I do. And it's been just a beautiful change from corporate into this is my truth, that helping people get in touch with themselves again.
And this is why we're very excited to talk about this concept of truth today. One of the things that I'm a very strong believer in is that assuming that all this truth is inside of us all along, it doesn't necessarily mean we can't have that in a corporate working environment. It's just really not promoted that way. And being able to find those ways where we can do that, where we can do a corporate job and have that truth and show up as human. So I know some of the things, or one of the big things that we were talking about just before we started recording was that growing up and in I was basing this off of an article I read in Forbes about 28 ways to climb the corporate ladder, that we get built in competitiveness almost, in that it would be nice to just say, hey, we're all human, we're all fellows, like we're in this together. We do say a lot of those things, but then we also meme things like two gazelles running away from a lion, and the one just being like, I don't have to run faster than the lion, I just have to run faster than you. And to me, I always think about bears because I'm Canadian. But we have this kind of, and I feel like it is encouraged, it's built in, it's celebrated. When we beat someone out for another job, we celebrate. When we achieve something that someone else doesn't, we celebrate. The corporate ladder in essence is that, right? Like, there's rungs, there's only one person who can move up it, therefore everybody else is my competition, and I have to address it as such. When I'm in the interview process, I have to do the same thing, right? Like, there's one job, we're all competing for the job. there's so much of this competition in our narrative that it starts to kind of soften that truth voice from inside of us and gets overburdened with that narrative. So Tawana, I know that there was a lot in this competition arena that was resonating for you before we started, so I'm going to go to you.
You definitely hit it. And you know, going back to the topic of our show, with the truth and us starting out as human, one of the reasons why I genuinely believe we don't start out as human is because we're animalistic. We're conditioned to, like you already expressed, only one person can win. So as soon as you do that, you go from being compassionate, caring, considerate of others, to thinking about self. What do I need to do to get it? What is it going to take me? What do I have to get out of my way to get it, to finish by any means necessary? And I like that phrase, but I have thrown in by any moral means necessary. Because if it costs you your soul, if it costs you sleep, if it costs someone else, like, if it causes them to be grieving, are you really winning? Or are you going to find yourself at the top and be alone because you had to kill everything and everybody along the way to get there? You can't be trusted. You can't be confided in. You don't relate to anyone because you refuse to be human. So definitely, so long as we focus on competition, and I'm not being naive to say that there isn't any. It's okay to be inspired, though. It's not okay to always function from a place of scarcity that says, hold on, sweetheart, that says, if somebody else gets it, that means there's no room for me to also get it. Think about music. How many genres are there, and how many artists are there in all those genres of music? There's room. There's still plenty of customers to buy and listen, right? We can do that also in business.
Yeah. I think that's a really important point. And I know, Kathryn, one of the things I heard you mention earlier was that we are all, on the inside, on the truth side, we're all wired for this compassion. And so that's in us, it doesn't disappear. And so it's really interesting too, because what this also brings up for me is we did an episode on how as humans, we're not meant to walk alone. And I feel like there's times where each of us and all of you listening have experienced that, where you just need a shoulder to lean on. And if there's too much competition, then we also have, like, you might end up at the top, but you don't have that. You are now walking alone, and that's not what humans are meant to do. So I just find it very interesting, and like I'd love to hear from your perspective, just some conversation around this, Kathryn, in terms of like the competition and how it's like celebrated and keep driving for it, but then when we reach that goal at the top, we're really reaching for something that we weren't trying to reach for anyway, if we were tapped in to that truthiness part of ourselves.
Yeah, I'll have to look at that conversation that you guys had on this topic, but the first thing that comes to mind is small kids. When you look at small kids in a group, they're so loving. Everyone's giving hugs, like they're celebrating everything. They're so excited. Kids are really naturally joyful and not competitive. They have to learn that, and they learn it, in a lot of ways, culturally, in school, all of the things. But that's who we are, and we lose it along the way. And when we are empathetic with ourselves and coming from that joyful place, things are way, way different, whether it's in business or with your family or your own inner dialogue. Things open up because it's stressful to be competitive all of the time. We're not made for that. If you think of the fight or flight and running from danger, that's meant to be a small burst. But when we're competitive consistently, that is not a small burst. It's this, adrenaline going all of the time. It's a way of living that our bodies really can't handle. And the best way that I know of in my life, and also working with my clients, to back away from that habit, because it is such an ingrained habit in so many people, especially women. We're just, oh man, we want to just do so well. We really do. We want the gold star. And, that's a whole nother conversation. But the best way to start stepping away from this is to slow down, slow everything down. And it feels really, really hard to do that. But when we slow down, a couple things happen. The first thing is we can breathe, and our bodies physically, that adrenaline stops rushing and our heart rate slows down, and, that physical response settles. And then we have the mental capacity to start listening to other people. And when we start listening to other people, we just instantly are not as competitive. When you really, really listen to other people, you start caring about them, and you start becoming invested in what they're talking about, and you're curious, and you're like that little kid, like those little kids out there on the playground, and they're super pumped about everything that everyone's doing. We become that way, like, wow, that's amazing. Or what about this? What about this? And then when, that starts happening and we talk to ourselves and our own inner dialogue is going on, we get curious about ourselves. Like, why do I do this? Do I really like this? Am I living a way that feels good to me? It's that curiosity and that listening to ourselves. And when all of this is going on, it's like a snowball. It builds, it gets momentum, and things start shifting gradually. You start saying different things, you start thinking differently, you make different decisions, you treat people differently, and that shapes everything around you, whether it's, your business, your family, whatever, and you're not as competitive. Being competitive is not even, in the same spectrum as everything I just described. And pretty soon you're not even thinking about it. You're not even taking those actions or saying those things that results in that competitive, anxious feeling. You're over here doing something else, being a human, the human that we're meant to be.
Mm-hmm. I think this is so interesting because one of the themes that comes up pretty consistently on this show is intentionality. And when you show up intentionally competitive, and it's, I just learned so many things from the show. If being competitive isn't our natural state of being, right? We see these kids, they're really not, like, they might all be trying to see who can get on the monkey bars first, but they're all having turns and cheering for each other as they get across them and all of these things. It's a learned skill to be competitive. And then we use that learned skill, and the more and more we use it, the better we get at it. Right? So you're still getting really good being competitive. And I'll tell you guys, this is specifically interesting for me because I would consider myself competitive. So I'm now in coaching zone of you guys coaching me. But I can see how that takes you away from that being state of just being human, because every time that I'm in competitive mode, I'm not in just being Tracy. And it's interesting because sometimes I'm like, well, that's just part of being Tracy, is that I'm competitive. But now when you like, no, I wasn't like that when I was a little kid, right? I was taught that. Specifically, I was taught it by my father. And he did a really good job of teaching me it. And I have lots of gold medals to prove it. But I'm just thinking, like, it just is like, it's so interesting for me because I also am a big believer in being and listening and hearing what other people have to say. And I want to hear Tara's perspective on that too, because I know Tara has many things to say about listening. But it's like, if being competitive is like a non-human habit, what are some of the other non-human habits that we have that we don't even know about? Okay, that's a different episode too. So let's hit it, Tara.
Well, actually, it was funny because I was actually thinking of you, Tracy, the entire time that we were talking about the competitive, because I know that you always self-identify as competitive. But, you know, when you were talking, I definitely, just in listening to this whole conversation, that competitiveness you can't possibly, I was making notes over here, you can't think of others compassionately when you're in a competitive state of mind. I don't think they can live in the same space at all. And so it's really interesting that we're having this conversation, because I never really thought about it until you guys were talking. And something else that I think, and I shared with you guys prior to us coming on, was that, you know, when I was in my career, I didn't listen to myself, which is why the past year I've had to learn to listen to myself and to those truths again, because I was that walking zombie. I was that very, very driven, I'm sure I was very competitive too. But I didn't have the time. I never slowed down. And so when I have slowed down, I absolutely agree, Kathryn, that I have, you know, it's so easy for me to listen and to hear all those little things from people and to take that all in, when I missed it for over 15 years. And I know so many people are still, I know that COVID allowed us to slow down. And so my encouragement would be to continue that. I know that it was like rush, get back. And we did an episode on this too, rush, get back to normal, whatever that is. But take that time, because that allowed us as humans to slow down and to start to listen to ourselves. But if we just rev back into that same exact pattern, we're never going to stop, and we're never gonna get to be fully fulfilled. And I think I wrote this, that when we are fully fulfilled in life, it also fulfills our soul, and we're just happier human beings. So that was my addition too.
Yeah, I think it's great. Like, just to piggyback on what you all said in encouragement, I believe there's a time and place for everything, right? There's a time when you need to be, if a bear was running after your baby and you decided not to beat that bear, problem, right? Big trouble. Not just that there's a bear around, but what about the baby, right? What about you and your lives? Like, right? So there's a time and place for everything. And when competition is in order, go get it. Get in your zone, mode out, right? Win your best win. You know, win your best win. Yet there are times in teaming where being internally competitive is to your detriment. And I think knowing the difference makes a big, hold on, please wait for me, sweetheart. It makes a big difference in the outcomes that we do or don't get. And if you're in a teaming environment and you're being internally competitive with the people around you that you're supposed to be helping one another, right? To get to the big finish, because there is a mutual goal that we're all trying to hit. Why we're motivated to do it may absolutely be different. And as a leader, learning to speak to that motivation is what mobilizes people as well, right? But if I feel like I got to do it better than Tracy, one, we're not even doing the same thing, which in and of itself doesn't make sense. Two, if we are doing the same thing, there's a reason why they needed two of us to do it. Why can't we work together to make it happen, to be more productive, to be more efficient, to be more effective? We can go so much farther together than we can do in isolation. And so do it yourself doesn't mean do it alone, regardless of what area in life or professional experience you may be in, you know, whatever season you're in. So I think, you know, as long as we have perspective and apply what's relevant when it's relevant to apply it, then things tend to integrate better, and they make more sense, for lack of better ways to describe it.
Yeah. Well, now I'm thinking like, this is why they have adult sports, right? So we have an outlet for our competitiveness, because I can just go play baseball or basketball or run a triathlon or something to as an outlet. Because like, I'm going to tell you guys, this is just very insightful for me, because like Tara mentioned, I do self-identify as being competitive. And now I'm wondering why, like, what created, and I know what I did, like I grew up that way, and I was encouraged, and every time I won something, it was celebrated. And it's just very interesting for me because all of these, I'm really beginning to see that what gets celebrated is what turns into a habit. And like that was celebrated my entire life by like pretty much everybody who was around me. So that just became part of quote unquote who I am. But it's not actually. And it's something that is like, we're talking about truths, right? It's just really interesting for me because what I'm realizing, although I have self-identified as that for so long, and I'm sharing this because I don't know if any of our listeners are experiencing the same thing, is that to me, that was the truth, that I was just competitive. It was part of who I am, and it's part of things I value. And now looking at it from this different perspective and listening, like taking a break and listening to myself and asking the question, well, like, why do I value competition so much? And looking back and being like, oh, but that doesn't actually come from me. That comes from outside of me.
Boom.
And it's not my truth. And I can make it my truth. I can stay like that. If I feel like it empowers me and like is a good reflection of me, then I can keep that. But it's not something that I decided. It was something that I was made into. So this is just a very interesting conversation to me, because I think as you guys are watching me go through this, and this is one example of many truths that are imparted upon us by our parents, by our society, by your schooling, by your friends, by your community, whatever. And they're not necessarily you.
Yeah.
So sorry guys, I'm not sure if you're seeing my like brain explode right now. It's like I signed up for a coaching session with Kathryn, and we're just like all gonna watch it.
Right? Like
I can totally see it.
Let's bounce back to Kathryn, because you shared before we started recording the actual episode. Kathryn shared with us a resource, a book, and she can introduce that again, to help us recognize, because society has conditioned us in general, regardless of your background, your location. Society has conditioned us to celebrate the external accomplishments, right? So, like, for example, when women get engaged, congratulations. So the women that aren't engaged, they shouldn't be celebrated. Their lives suck because they're not in companionship, right? Or women, if women who have children, congratulations, you're pregnant. So the women who don't want to have children or have not yet had children, their lives aren't to be right, or dads, or like whatever. We're speaking of women because we're here, but it's not gender specific. But the truth is, when you get the promotion, you win. But what about the people who are in doctoral programs? How many times do you hear, yes, you've made it to year 2 and you're about to come up on your thesis, like, congratulations? No, you don't hear that. You don't hear that. And then most of the time, people don't even know what the accomplishment is going to be for that person when they finish, aside from being called doctor. Doctor of what? Do they even get it? Nope. But all kinds of other external accomplishments are so obvious because we've been conditioned that everything around you and everything that's attracted to you is successful, but you, the person, we like all the stuff that the external, the obvious side of you that we can experience, and the work then that comes with all of the things behind that, or the trauma even that comes with all the things that generates a lot of the external validation as well, doesn't get dealt with. So Kathryn, please enlighten us with, again, with what you express, what you share, resources that will help people overcome, the grief that actually comes with competition.
Well, and even the truth, like how can they listen to themselves so that they can figure out, like Tracy just had it was just beautiful to watch. I know Kathryn's loving it because this is her space, but it's those things, like so many of us are going through those times, or maybe we're not quite there. Share with us, how do we listen more so that we can figure that out?
Yeah, so my first temptation is to share several resources, but that's actually, in my experience, not helpful. because what's helpful is slowing down and listening to yourself. You cannot find these truths in a book. Sometimes it's helpful to read those and like get your wheels turning, but what just happened with Tracy right now is she was like, huh. And then you even said, I wonder why I'm competitive. Where did that come from? And you got curious and you started asking why. It's like little kids have the answers to everything, I promise. They ask why. Why? Well, why is that? And as adults, it sometimes drives us crazy, but they have that curiosity of why. And that is a really, really powerful way for you to get in touch with yourself. Just ask why, and then come up with an answer, write it down. Well, why is that? Do it 5, 6, 7 times and keep going, because I promise there's always more underneath it. And that's when and where you might want to find other resources. It's not at the beginning of, I feel like I've got all this stuff to figure out, and you're kind of in a little bit of a faster, like frenzy feeling. That's the time when you slow yourself down and you start asking why, and you get curious, and maybe you talk with someone and they help you, process this by listening. And you might even ask them, I don't want your advice. What I really, really need right now is for you to listen to me and ask me why, and challenge people. Don't ask me, anything but why. Get curious. Don't give me advice. Only ask me questions. And I will tell you, many of my coaching sessions, I only ask questions, because it's back to, you always know why. Tracy, I'm sure you could, just go, why? And you could come up with, your own truth to why you identified as competitive. And then you can get curious about, well, how is that serving me now? And how is it not? And there's all sorts of ways to look at it, but that would be my number one recommendation. And I will share a resource that we chatted about before our conversation. There's a book called Time to Think by Nancy Klein. And it's a beautiful exploration of giving yourself and other people the space to think and to get quiet and listen to people. Not just, oh yeah, I'm a good listener. And in your mind, you're still have all your chatter, but you really, really listen. And in that space of listening in business and, in your personal life, whatever in life, you get curious, and then you naturally ask questions and you learn about people. And, maybe they're really angry. Maybe they're having some emotions that you're uncomfortable with, and you might want to react or, just get in there with, no, there was a misunderstanding, or well, like all of that. But practicing the skill of compassionate listening and getting curious about what's going on is just, it's a beautiful gift for yourself and for them. And it changes things. And in this book, Time to Think, she talks about how she goes into corporations and trains teams about how to listen, and how businesses change dramatically when teams learn to listen to one another and individuals within an organization, and how that applies, elsewhere. But yeah, those are my recommendations. And one more thought, Tracy, that you might want to consider: why am I competitive? And how do you identify that way? It's almost like being competitive it's like you have a palette of paint and you have a competitive color. And sometimes you want to be competitive and, you do that for whatever reasons that are fulfilling to you, but you're not that color. It's only one of your colors. And just like, being loving is a color, or sometimes being difficult is a color, but we have the power to choose which of those colors we're going to paint with. And the only way to be intentional about that is to get to know yourself by slowing down. And, maybe you like that color a whole bunch and it takes up a big space in your palette. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But it's not you. It's just something that you're choosing to express through and, play with and paint with and have fun with. But it's something maybe to consider.
I really love that example of the paint and the palette, because I do believe that there are all of these different parts of us, and we can't, especially these parts of us that like aren't, they're not like naturally us. They're just like a part of us that it's almost like a costume, right? Like I'm thinking of Mr. Dressup's Tickle Trunk, and there's like all the costumes in there, and today I'm a pirate, and today I'm a doctor, and today I'm whatever when you're a kid, right? And you're not any one of those things, but you're all of those things at the same time. And it's just really interesting, because one of the things that Tara had popped in the chat here was that you really have to get good at listening to yourself in order to decide which one of these colors you're going to paint with. And it's actually really interesting because, like, seriously, guys, I keep asking myself, why am I competitive? What do I like about being competitive? Well, I don't know if I like being competitive, but I like team sports. So what do I like about team sports? And I'm like having this whole behind the scenes conversation in my brain. And it just is so interesting, because what I realized is that, like, I like winning together. So like I've always played team sports. I've never done individual sports. And I like the feeling of the team coming together to accomplish a thing. And that it's not necessarily about beating someone else to do that, but it is about the accomplishment. And it's funny because I have self-identified historically of one of my values being achievement. And I think still by default, it's kind of tied to competition, in that I have to beat somebody in order to achieve something, but I don't actually have to beat somebody in order to be able to achieve something. And in sports, that's how it's built, but you don't have to. So I wanted to tie back that piece of when you can really start to listen to yourself and ask those questions and be curious, then it's like, I will tell you guys, I have some practice with this. I've done a lot of personal development over the last 8 years or so, and I find it a fun exercise to be able to do this. The first time you do it, it will not necessarily feel fun. It might feel difficult. You might not know how to answer that question. You might not know how to answer why, and you might kind of get that feeling that maybe something isn't you. Like you might be like, oh yeah, that is a paint color. It's not me, but why am I choosing that paint so often? Oh my gosh, I have no idea why I'm choosing that paint so often. And this learning how to listen to yourself and to ask yourself questions, just like we learn how to be competitive, we learn how to do that. We learn how to ask ourselves questions. We learn how to be self-reflective. And it would be nice if growing up, that is what we learned, instead of things like being competitive, except it's not. Except maybe if you have like very mindset trained parents, you might learn those things. We just don't. And so it takes some practice to get good at it. Just like it took you practice. Look, it took me the 30 some years of practice to get really good at being competitive. And then we have the opportunity to practice a different skill and to tie it back into what we're talking about here. The truth is that we're humans. The truth isn't that we're competitive or we're like competitive versus compassionate, or that like we are choosing those two. Like there's so much narrative, and being able to get to these like critical truths, which are really like these things, like we are human. It takes that slowing down, it takes the listening, and those things take practice. So if you're not good at it today, that's okay. You don't have to quit. And it will, especially so if you guys are like me and you've had a lot of practice being competitive, and you try something like this and you suck at it to start with, you're disinclined to continue on that path because you don't feel like you're winning, you feel like you're losing. And having that competitive nature, you'll want to switch and go to do something you can win at. But there's so much, just the word that comes to me is space, right? There's so much space for personal growth when, especially if we're on a trajectory of competition, and we can take that time and be like, oh, what if I wasn't? What if I took this time just to lose? What does it feel like to lose? I've never really like internalized what it feels like. Maybe that's why I don't like losing, right? And like, maybe that's just emotion. Maybe I can handle my emotion a different way. There's so much space for self-actualization. And I truly believe that things like competitiveness are not meant to drive us towards self-actualization. They're just meant to keep us in a societal framework that is easy to maintain. So I'm just loving this. I want to hear what anybody else has to say in wrapping up.
Well, as we prepare to wrap up, because this has been truly a impactful conversation, I want to take a moment to acknowledge and appreciate how confidently and courageously Kathryn reframed something that is so easy for all of us to just go right in, right? She specifically said, well, it's not helpful to first tackle it with resources. And then I'm like, you know what? She's correct, because we can give all the strategy in the world, right? Those of us who know and apply methods, tools, systems, techniques, whatever, we can give all the strategy we want in the world. But if you don't first, have a awareness of the challenge, right? Aren't really willing to tackle it from there, none of that will make a difference. And so I'm grateful that we're in a network with professionals who will say, wait, slow down, as she's expressed, and let's first figure out what the issue is, or what the challenge, or what the conflict, right, internal or external, may be. So thank you, Kathryn, for reframing that for all of us, so that way we don't just go into mode of picking out what the nearest external thing is to solve it. So use self as a resource to start defining what we need to own, so that we can nurture and then execute on it by following through with whatever resources may be appropriate. So just wanted to make sure that you knew that was heard. And if anybody missed it, there it is. Is there something else that you'd like to share with us, Kathryn, before we do the wrap up? Because we always give a summary of our discussion.
Yeah, thank you for that acknowledgement. And, that's something I learned through personal experience of seeking outside of myself, whether it was books, whether it was programs I signed up for, whether it was, I've got to talk to this person, they will help me get myself straightened out. And I've been fortunate to have a lot of great mentors help me understand that it is not about anyone but me. And nobody can help me, no book can help me truly in a way that shifts my life or my thinking or whatever significantly until I wave that white flag. Okay, I need to sit with myself. And that is hard. That can be really, really hard, because then we have to really hear ourselves. And sometimes we don't know how to do that, or it's scary, or, we really have to be honest. And being honest with yourself Ooh, that's something. Yeah. Do you want to say something, Tara?
No, I was just going to say, and sometimes we don't like what we're hearing, right? Like, let's
Mm-mm.
be honest. Like we can look inside and we can say, wow, how did I get to here?
Yep.
How
It's
did I get to
taking,
here? I think, oh,
yeah, we have to be accountable then to ourselves. If you listen to yourself truly, then you have to answer to yourself too. And that, for me, going through that was tough at first to take full accountability for my life and what I was feeling. And I, I decided, okay, I really do want to change things. And once I said that and said, okay, I'm doing it, it got so much easier. It was just that first, okay, I'm not going to look outside of myself. I'm going to look inside myself and own it. Then I got the insights for moving forward. And it's back to what I said in the beginning. Everybody, 100% of the time, has that inside of themselves. We are very wise and powerful beings, everyone. And sometimes just stepping through that door of listening to ourselves can feel scary because we don't have a lot of practice. But I promise you, it is worth it. Then once you get through that one door, maybe you do want to get some support with a book or a group or whatever until you're faced with your next, I got to check in with myself really deeply again and go through the process again. It never, ever ends. And it becomes more comfortable as you realize it's actually beautiful because you keep growing and you keep learning, you keep expanding, and you know that it might be a little uncomfortable, but when you recognize yourself in that tough spot and knowing that you have it within yourself, it becomes a lot, I'm not going to say something to look forward to, but you can get through it. You got through however many times before, and it's not going to take, a lot of money or a lot of learning or a lot of talking to other people and figuring it out. It is none of that. None of that if you want it to last. And yeah, that's what I love about the journey I've been on and the journey that my clients are on is holding that space because it's universal.
I think that just ties so nicely back to the theme of the show, which is truth. We're human. Show up that way first. And I think it's just, even with that title, I feel like, Kathryn, you created a really unique perspective in that. I think often when we say show up, we're looking at like, how are we outwardly showing up? And today we talked a lot about like kind of the internal showing up, right? Like, how are we showing up for ourselves? How are we listening? How are we listening to ourselves? How are we giving ourselves enough space and time to slow down? And what are the benefits of that in how we show up to society? And I think it's a very, like, kind of, I don't think it's talked about enough in terms of this. I mean, what we're all about here, which is being a human, right? Like, especially in business, we didn't even really touch on the like in business piece of it today. But when you have this time to have that self-reflection, like, I'll be honest, I have a different way to move forward in my business because of the time we spent today and me looking at, oh, what is driving that competitiveness? And there's like even so many spaces and how I see different people on social media as competitors or whatever. Like, I have a more human way to approach that now. And it's not because we did a whole bunch of activities or we had a whole bunch of strategies or we have even a new definition of competition, right? It's because I had a moment to sit with myself and ask myself the question, what does this mean to me? And what I'm hoping you guys are taking away from this conversation today is that when we can give ourselves that space, and we ourselves have the power to give ourselves that space, we don't need to have someone give it to us. And it is nice to have a coach. It's nice to have a work environment that's going to give you that space. We as humans ourselves have the available space, and we just need to take it. And when we do, it can empower us throughout so many spots of our lives, including in business. So with that, Tawana, let's hit up our summary.
Can I say one thing really quick? This was such a beautiful, like, I had so many realizations as well over here. I'm writing down. I want to say something. Tawana, thank you again for bringing us back to that, because I think people did probably miss that point of that, you know, we're the resource. And I'm grateful for that, because that's something that I've always struggled with. And Kathryn, just the way that just the listening and just asking ourselves questions and becoming curious with ourselves. Like, you guys hear me say a lot, like, I believe values are foundational. I believe this is foundational. Like, you have got to learn how to do this. And I'm going to have to do even more work. And just listening to all of this, I'm just sitting here, like, feel like my mind is blown. So I really do encourage people to use this as you build your foundation in life and business. Like, this should be something that is reoccurring every, you know, all the time, so that it does become easier, and that there's just so much here.
And
so thank you for this.
We'll just have to have Kathryn back another time to talk about
absolutely.
more things.
I would love to be
Absolutely.
back. Awesome. Okay, Tawana, I think we're ready for you.
You know, third time's a charm, so it's all good.
I'm so sorry I had to say that. It was just
Do
so good.
not be apologetic about sharing your insights. Absolutely. That's what we're here for, to discuss. And so again, thank you so much, Kathryn. She brought to us today the topic of truth. We're human. Show up that way first. And we talked about slowing down. Kathryn shared with us that slowing down is the principal way, the principal way to increase in the capacity to start listening and become invested in yourselves as well as others. When you are continuously in competition mode, it's more challenging for you to lean in, answer why, and listen to what you need, how you can share, and be of value to others. We also covered ask questions. It is not helpful to start with pursuing external solutions without first understanding what the challenge or conflict is. We have the power to choose by being intentional. Kathryn has shared with us that, and that we have the awareness to reframe the idea of what resource means, and that we can start within. Kathryn also guided us along the thought that it is a process. Remember, you may be a little uncomfortable, yet when you recognize who you are in the tough spots, we can come to the ultimate theme or topic of this discussion, and that's making that truth last. Start with that truth. And the fact is, we're human.
I feel like this is what we talk about here, you guys, being human. And this was just such a great segment of that conversation. And I'm really hoping that everybody took those pieces away. And I would encourage everybody, as like one key takeaway from today, slow down and start listening. And until we practice, can't get good at it. And I think, again, if for those of you who are watching who have corporate backgrounds, the corporate work environment is not built for you to slow down. It's built for you to go for 8+ hours a day. And so just look for opportunities to slow down. Look for opportunities to ask those strategic questions. Use that time in your, I don't know how many people are commuting right now, but I used to always use that time in my commute to just like decompress and slow down, because like my car is going slow, so I might as well go slow. Just find those places in your life where you can take that moment to slow down. And once you can find those and take those opportunities, more and more opportunities will present themselves. So, and we'd also Love to hear how that goes for you. If you guys are taking away from this episode to slow down, share in the comments how that made you feel, what was different for you in that. And I'm sure Kathryn would love to hear that as well. So please share. We would love to hear how that is working for you guys and how that might have brought you more. Oh man, my words are just bad today. How would it brought you closer to the truth of who you are? With that, I want to say another big thanks to Kathryn. We're going to send our house out again to our Miss Debbie, who we were missing today. And until next time, remember, be a human.
Be a human.
Be a human.
Be a human.